imagine you can be transformed to the French Polynesia. Yeah? Really in a kingdom far, far away. Yeah? So this is France, Paris. Where are we? We're over here somewhere, right? So French Polynesia is probably closer to New Zealand than it is to the United States. If you remember a long time ago when we were trying to make our way there, our French colleagues, or moving on, suggested that you can fly through Vancouver or something like that. We now know what they meant. So when the COVID hit, you always have to fly through the US, no matter what. You always have to stop somewhere, whether it's San Francisco or Washington State or somewhere in this, and then you move on there because the flight is too long. So this is like 12 hours of flight. This is 5 hours to New Zealand and so on. But because of the COVID restrictions and the US being closed for a while, the only way to come from Paris, which is the main country overseeing French Polynesia, you have to go to Vancouver in Canada, and then from there they would fly. But then they stopped that, just for everyone's information. Remember, we were like, why would you go through Canada to it? So there was an explanation to that and stuff. But we're here to talk about a very special country, in the sense of why and how ESL, the early school leavers, is actually perceived or is happening and so on. It is very different to everyone else's country here. So I will tell you all about it. So you can close your eyes and transport yourself to that lovely place. Country statistics. As you might expect, most of the people living there are natives, so the Polynesians. The type of people that you see in Moana movie, and I will obviously have a character of that movie there later on and so on. The other percentage of people who live there are two types of French. One of them are local French, and one of them are metropolitan French, meaning that flying from mainland France. So I met quite a few of those in with my visiting professorship in Lyon and in Paris and so on. So actually, French government does a lot to integrate the smaller territories in with the mainland and so on. And people go back and forth quite often. There's about 5 flights a day if you wanted to fly, from Paris and so on to somewhere else like Tahiti. But again, if you can just keep in mind the percentage, 78 versus 6 or 4. So local French 6% are those who either married the Polynesian, usually women, and stayed, people who retired there, or people who just were born to a French family and decided to stay on their set of islands and so on. But the interesting part that everyone sort of was talking about is how does a country like that survives in the ever sort of challenging and crisis inflicted world and so on. So I pulled up some data from the what's called the comparison of cost of living and so on, and it compares sort of a pre-COVID cost of living of every sort of country in the world to the ones in New York. So in New York, if you have if you in Tahiti, if you have $1,000, it will be an equivalent to roughly $800 in New York. So you spend more. Everything is more expensive, which is kind of explained itself because everything has to be flown in and things. Grocery prices. The major international retail store, for example, Apple, is $5 for a kilo. The oranges again are €5 now, €5. I mean, I'm a little bit shocked by the lettuce. That's €3. So it's because for us we go into Lidl and we could buy it for 40p, I think, something like that. So it gives, or for potatoes and so on. So or 1 liter of milk is 3 euros. So for us, it's very expensive. I think it's expensive, but it just depends on how you look at it and so on. Water is not so expensive, but just to give you an idea of what the prices are like, because then you compare the cost of living against the salaries and the expectations of different people. So, 78% Polynesians, 6 to 4% of the locals and so on. And if you just bear with me one more time on the cost of living, because it's usually better when it's in a graph and things like that, right? So here's, if you have, I don't know, $100 in New York, which we would perceive as expensive anyways, right? It's not the cheapest place, it's not Texas, for example. So alcohol is cheaper in Tahiti, clothing is probably a bit more expensive, communication is more expensive, so the mobile phones and whatnot. Education, as you see, is less. This is kind of what we're focusing on at the moment. Other sort of groceries and so on, expensive. Healthcare is cheaper because they're French. So the social system is still there, and you know, a lot of support and so on. So just you know, just to give you an idea, what really stands out is the transport costs. It's not a test. I'm not going to ask you why, because all the energy has to be sort of flown in. Essentially, there's no natural resources and stuff, so it's extremely expensive. So we will leave the transport, cost of alcohol, and so on aside, and we will look at education. And again, the sort of the information that we pulled out from different sources and so on says that actually, if we look at the price, so it's for people who come not necessarily from France but from expats. That's the estimate. So primary school is about 11,000, so it's about 1,000 a month, and for high school it's a little bit more than 1,000 a month, or a little less, and so on. So for us, that's what we pay anyways in the UK. You know, you can send a little child to crash and so on. But overall, for the locals, the cost for items as crash and preschool fees and so on, high school fees and tutors, the study fees are normally considered low. So what they say is that it's quite common for the family to look after the small children, for you know, kind of like the not too dissimilar to Greece or Turkey, where grandmas are looking after the whatever, aunties and so on, but they tend to pay them for it. It's a customary thing, so you pay a little bit, not a whole lot, but we will move on from there. So, and this seems to be quite pleasant. Yeah. Primary education, and we'll talk about primary education. So France pumps a lot of money into the educational system in the French Polynesia. This is a local sort of pre-primary, I guess, the crash schools and so on. Systems is very similar to that of France, not only because of the medium of instruction, it's all in French. So they instilled French in 1962 as an educational language and so on, and it is compulsory to the age of 16. Why not? It's free, you can go to school, it's fairly pleasant, and so on. Children begin at primary school at the age of 5 and remain there for 6 years. So everyone is taken care of, they are looked after, lovely nurses and so on, yeah. What could go wrong? Families are huge importance in French Polynesia. Everyone spends a lot of time outside, playing, having fun, so there's a lot of, if you sort of think of the French perspective of joie de vivre, right, so the joy of life, and so on, so they do the same in French Polynesia, but at a different level. There's a lot of sort of the family, not necessarily the closest ones, not only the parents, but there's involvement of everyone is probably related, I would think. So this is a picture of them singing sort of native Polynesian songs and learning how to sort of, again, sort of more on a moment where they're all sort of sing little songs and so on. But so far, quite a lovely sort of outlook on how it's happening, you know, primary education and so on, involvement of supportive teachers, of supportive families and so on, yeah, beautiful life. Secondary education. So they take children from a further sort of 7 years through the age of 17. The 16, 17 seems to be used interchangeably in different sources, so we will go with what they say. The first 6 years are compulsory, but this is where the interesting part happens. Very few islanders, actually, the native Polynesians, the French are fine. The native Polynesians don't make it through high school. The public schools are fully financed. There are private schools, but they are not prohibitive, as we have seen before, sort of about 900 or something euros and so on.